Using a 19mm socket, go ahead and remove your lug nuts. With the lug nuts removed, we'll go ahead and remove the wheel, set that aside. Go ahead and open up your hood, grab this cover right here, gently pull upward. Set this aside. Use a 10mm socket or a wrench, and go ahead and loosen the ground terminal here. Go ahead and remove that, set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and put the ignition key in, turn it to the on position, allowing us to have full motion to turn the steering wheel without draining the battery. Using a 14mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 slide pin bolts from our brake caliper. Use a small pry bar. Go ahead and work the caliper off. And we're going to use our caliper hanger here to hold this caliper up. Using a 17mm socket, remove your caliper bracket bolts. Grab the bracket, slide that off and set it aside. We're going to use our impact screwdriver here to remove these screws. Once you get these loose, go ahead and spin that out. These normally don't have to be any tighter than hand tight with a screwdriver. Go ahead and set these screws aside. Go ahead and grab your brake rotor. Remove this, set this aside. We're going to use our pliers and remove our cotter pin that's securing our lower control arm ball joint here. You will have to replace these cotter pins. Using a 17mm socket, remove your lower nut here. Using our 10mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove the nuts and bolts. Holding our ABS and flex line. Move these 2 10s here, holding the flex line. Using a pair of pliers, we're going to go ahead and remove our cotter pin from our outer tie rod here. You will have to replace this cotter pin upon reinstallation. Using a 19mm socket, go ahead and remove the outer tie rod and nut. We're going to use a hammer and we're going to strike the knuckle here to release the tie rod end. This will allow full free mobility. Using a 36mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our axle nut. Make sure that your axle is free floating through here. Grab the axle, work it back and forth. And the upper control arm here, I want to go ahead and remove the cotter pin. Use your pliers. And straighten this out if you can. And try and pull this out. Gotta remove that unit. Using a 17mm socket, let's go ahead and remove this nut right here. I want to leave it on the stud a few threads. Now I want to try and separate the upper control arm ball joint from the knuckle itself. We're going to use a hammer and strike the side right here, try and get this to separate. That's separated. Let's go ahead and use our ratchet again. This nut here is supporting this knuckle itself, so be prepared when this comes off. The knuckle can swing out and away, so be careful with that. Now what I want to do is use a 10mm socket. We want to remove this bolt holding our ABS sensor into the back of the knuckle. All right, once we get that bolt out, I'm going to go ahead and remove our ABS sensor. Go ahead and set this aside. So we went ahead and supported our CV axle with a hanger off of the strut spring. Now that we have the complete knuckle separated from everything else except for our lower control arm, I'm going to go ahead and use our hammer. We're going to strike the lower control arm, and this will loosen the ball joint on the knuckle. So we're going to pull up on the knuckle and hit the control arm. I'm going to go ahead and use our press and press the hub out of the knuckle. I'm going to go ahead and remove our backing plate at this point here. You may or may not have to do this here. We're just going to remove it because it is going to be a little bit easier to work. We have a retainer or a lock ring that is keeping our bearing inside the knuckle. I'm going to soak this with some rust penetrant. What we're going to do is we want to loosen this lock ring. So I'm going to use a punch, and right in the eyelet, I'm going to go ahead and tap this. I'm going to try and get this lock ring, the rust, to break free around the perimeter here. So I'm going to go ahead and use our pliers here. I want to go ahead and remove this. So we're going to pinch it and lift. There we go. We're just using a screwdriver here, or you can use a pry tool, and work our way around. We will be reusing this lock ring. I'm going to go ahead and use a small pry bar or pry tool here to work our way around the perimeter of this trim ring. Ours has a significant amount of rust buildup in there, so we're just going to slowly work this without deforming the ring. But once we get this going, it should just pop right off. And once you get that free, pay attention to the notch right here. This is the notch where your ABS sensor is going to be coming through the knuckle. So you want to make sure when you reinstall this, that goes right in that little keyway. I'm going to go ahead and press our bearing out through the front of the knuckle. Now your wheel bearing itself is going to have a magnetic pickup for your ABS speed sensor. This particular one has the magnet on this side here. And this side here has a seal. So this is a rubber seal, it has a little groove in it. So I want to pay attention to this here. When we're installing the side with a magnet, it has to go inboard for our ABS sensor when it comes through the hole to pick up on the rotation of the unit. So make sure that the magnet goes inward when we press this in like this. Now what we do is we took our old bearing, we set it down with the seal facing up, set this one here with the seal facing down. We're going to stack it so it fits perfectly around the perimeter, press around the perimeter of the bearing to get that in. And take our hub, or our knuckle actually, we clean this up, coat it with a light coating of grease. I'm going to line this up like so. So we found another hub race that fits on the perimeter here. That's going to give us a nice even point, but allow our bearing to get pressed in. This is going to give us a nice even pressure point. All right, let's go ahead and press this down. And if you feel any resistance, you want to stop and check everything out. Our bearing is going in nice and smooth. We can see that our bearing is completely pressed in all the way around the knuckle, nice and tight. And we have enough room to install our lock ring. So we went ahead and cleaned up our lock ring right here. We're going to go ahead and install this. Just to make sure that that's in place, we're going to use our punch and our hammer. We're just going to tap on the edges here, lock this in. Make sure it's in all the way around. All right, so when we pressed off our hub, one of the bearing races here stayed on the hub face itself. We're going to reuse our hub. We're going to go ahead and use our air chisel to pop this off. You can use a cutting wheel to go ahead and cut it off. So we're going to go ahead and apply some heat to the bearing race itself. This will cause the metal to expand and allow us to go ahead and pop that race off a little bit easier. I'm going to go ahead and pop off that race now. Probably just use a screwdriver or something to pop that off. Just going to tap this off. So once we get that bearing race off there, we went ahead and cleaned up the rust on the back side here. Want to make sure there's no burrs or anything like that causing any resistance from that being pressed onto the bearing. Want to inspect our hub face, make sure that this is nice and smooth. If there's any chips or nicks or anything out of this here, you want to go ahead and replace this here. Ours look pretty good. We're going to install our backing plate. All right, now that our hub is pressed into the knuckle, we'll go ahead and release this. Now that we have this off, you can confirm the hub itself is seated nice, the bearing is seated in, and our hub rotates nice and smooth. Let's go ahead and install our trim ring. You want to make sure that the notch on the back lines up with where your ABS sensor will be coming through on the top of the knuckle. Simply line that up. I'm going to press it down into place. And you can use your hammer to go ahead and tap that down and in. Let's go ahead and take our knuckle here. Going to get our lower ball joint set into the control arm. I'm going to go ahead and get our lower nut threaded on. And just going to spin that on as far as we can get it. I'm going to go ahead and remove our hanger support for our CV axle. Lower this down. Spin this around, get that axle reinstalled. I'm going to go ahead and install our CV axle or a spindle nut here. Get our tie rod onto the knuckle itself. I'm going to get our nut installed. Thread that on as far as we can. Let's go ahead and bring our control arm up and into the knuckle. We're going to use a pry bar. Put it between the upper control arm and the coil spring. Bring our knuckle up and in. Get that nut started. Once that's on, we'll go ahead and release the pressure on that control arm and remove our pry bar. I'm going to take our cotter pin, I'm going to line it up, and just going to go right through this notch here. Through the other side. Go ahead and bend this over. Take your cutters, and you can cut off any excess here. I'm going to go ahead and snug down our lower ball joint nut here. We're going to torque down our lower ball joint nut to 60 foot-pounds. You're going to take your rotor, you want to line up your recessed or dimpled sections here with the holes that are going to line up on your hub. So let's see, that is going to go this way. Like so. Then we're going to go ahead and put our retainer screws back on. If you have these, great, you can use them. You do not need them. It's not mandatory or critical to the operation of your braking system. going to install our caliper bracket. Line this up. We're going to get our upper bolt started first. And we'll get our lower bolt installed. We'll thread that in as far as we can. Let's install our inboard pad. This has our shim tab or squeak tab right here. I'll line this up, drop that in. Let's go ahead and get our outboard pad installed. Move our caliper hanger. Gonna line up our brake caliper. Slide this in and we'll go ahead and get our bolt started. Once you get that bolt in, go ahead and get the bottom one lined up. Thread that in as far as you can. Install your rubber cap on your brake bleeder screw. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and torque down our caliper bracket bolts to 79 foot-pounds. And repeat for the upper bolt. I'm going to torque our caliper bolts to 37 foot-pounds. Repeat for the upper bolt. Install our ABS wire bracket here. Let's get that nut started. Right here. Install one of our 10mm bolts. Install our other bolt down below here. And install our bolt for our ABS sensor right here. Just going to snug that down gently and repeat for the other bolts. Looks like our bracket came loose a little bit here. This little tab needs to be inside the control arm. Just reposition that, pop that up and in. There we go. Install our flex line bracket. We'll just snug those down. Go ahead and torque this nut down to 40 foot-pounds. Once that nut is torqued down, I'm going to go ahead and install our cotter pin here. I'm going to bend this over. This safety glasses, snip off the excess. I'm going to snug down our axle or spindle nut here. We're going to install 2 of the wheel lug nuts. I'm going to thread these on down. I'm going to use a pry bar here. I'm going to use this to hold that wheel from rotating. I'm going to go ahead and torque. Go ahead and torque our axle nut to 181 foot-pounds. Now you want to use a small chisel tip punch, and we're going to dimple the spindle nut into the axle notch here to keep that from backing off. Now I'll go ahead and remove the lug nuts. Let's go ahead and install your wheel. Get our lug nuts all started by hand first, and then we'll snug those down. We're going to torque our lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. Go ahead and grab your negative terminal, put that on. We'll go ahead and snug up our battery. Once that's on, go ahead and grab your cover, line that up, pop this into place.